Well, I'm Jeremiah, and I'm one of the pastors here, and it is really good to be with you this weekend as we continue this series where we are working on and working through this idea that helps us so much to understand what Jesus really is for, what Jesus is about. As we just thought about these questions, what do we think about when we think about God? The reality is that those answers matter so much. What is the character of this God? What is the heart of Jesus? What is he really about? And so, as we think about that during this series, we've been going through the lens of for, through this concept of for. What is Jesus for? And the reason why we've said we want to do that is because actually we've done it the wrong way previously. Christians, all of us kind of collectively, we've got a brand problem. And our brand problem comes from the fact that probably a lot because of the way that Christians in general have represented Jesus to the world, not a lot of great things come to mind when people think about Jesus. They think about what he's against and not what he's for. And that brand problem comes from the fact that Christians have shouted about what he's against and whispered about what he's for. And so to correct that, to move in the other direction, we've said that the heart of this series is that Christians need to understand and elevate what Jesus is for. Christians need to understand and elevate what Jesus is for. And if you're not a Christian, you're listening this weekend, I hope that this for you is helpful in a corrective sense. Maybe you've heard some things before that are off-putting, and this hasn't really been helpful to you, and maybe this weekend you hear some things that you go, that's clarifying and that is really helpful. If you're a Christian, I hope this is helpful language for you. I hope this helps you to be able to represent Jesus better as we go through this series. And I would say if you're a Christian, especially lean in because this series is a great apologetic. What I mean by that is this series gives you really good tools to talk about your faith in a way that is winsome, in a way that is compelling, in a way that people actually want to lean into. Because here's what I know happens. You get to Thanksgiving, you're sitting around the table with that unsaved family member, you're sitting at the barbecue with that friend who's not a Christian, and the conversation starts, hey, I've heard your Jesus is against this, explain that. We already feel on our heels. We already feel on the defensive. They say the best defense is a good offense. So Christians, let's understand and elevate what Jesus is for, but not just understand, not just elevate, let's also imitate. Because sometimes it's not about the words that we say, but the way that we live. And so Christians, if we could imitate what Jesus is for by living that same way, what we've said in your notes is that Christians, what Jesus is for, we should be for. What Jesus is for, Christians should be for. So this is a series not just to understand, but also to say, I want to apply this. I want to adapt my life. I want to shape myself to be just like Jesus. It's not just about information. It's about transformation. I've seen these videos from time to time come across my feed, or I see them in YouTube. It's called the marshmallow test. And what they do is they take a kid, bring a kid into a room all by themselves with a table and a chair, and there's a plate on the table. They bring the kid in, they sit the kid down, and then the person giving the instructions places a marshmallow on the plate in front of a kid. And the instructions are really clear. If you eat this marshmallow, you get this marshmallow and no more. But if you can wait till the timer goes off, I'll come back. And if you don't eat this marshmallow, wait till the timer goes off. It's still sitting here. When I come back, I'll give you more marshmallows. So they sit this kid down, the camera's rolling, the person leaves the room, and it's just awesome to watch. These squirmy, chubby-fingered kids trying to figure out what they're going to do in this battle against time with this marshmallow sitting right in front of them. And it's actually a fascinating experiment because what you end up seeing is what is a kid's capacity to look beyond what's right in front of them. Because the instructions were really clear. In the future, there's a thing that's going to happen that's better than what's right here in front of you, and all you have to do is keep that in the forefront of your mind, but they can't. And so these videos, they're so funny because these kids, man, they exercise all the self-control they can muster. They're doing their best, and depending on your personality, like you're like rooting for the kid, come on, hold out. I'm like, do it. Because First of all, it would just be a really boring video if the kid sat there for 10 minutes. Secondly, though, I'm that kid. Like, I know what that's like to be told, listen, there's something in the future and it's really good, hold on to it. But there's also something just right in front of you, and it can become so overwhelming and occupy so much of my mind. I brought my staff donuts the other day, and I told myself, this is for them. I'm not going to eat one. I set it in there. 30 minutes later, I'm that kid. Couldn't do it. How many times have you gone to an event or a barbecue or a party and you thought, and the thing's unfolding and you're like, I should say this. And you say it and you're like, oh, should have thought future about that. I was only thinking short term and I said the thing and I wish I wouldn't. Man, in our disciplines, in our habits, in our eating, in our social media usage, how many times have you seen something that you're like, that person did not think about the future when they wrote that thing? They didn't think about that post is going to still be here months from now. They didn't think about the people that are going to see that months from now. They just thought about right now and how I'm feeling. I got to get this out short term. And what happens is, in a whole bunch of ways, short-term thinking undercuts the way that what we actually want out of life. Short-term thinking makes us not invest. It affects our relationships. Again, it's just that kid who can't get past what's right in front of them. It's not that kid, it's also me, it's also you, it's all of us, and this is fed by the culture that we live in so many ways. In fact, we're products of our society because we're a society that thinks short term. Our whole culture is this way. We're a society that thinks short term. I mean, you see the car commercial, and what they put out there is just your down payment. That is not nearly as important as the whole price of the car that you're going to be paying. But like everything about our society is just shaped to say, just think about this in terms of the short term and what that's going to do for you, and then make your decision based on that. And we're products of that, and we do that. And so here's the really interesting thing. I think short term, you think short term. It's kind of how we're wired. It's how our culture shapes us to be. And then for many of us, we become Christians. And all of a sudden there's this clash. Because short-term thinking and Christianity actually have very, very little in common. Because here's what's true about Christianity is that in our Christian faith, what's real is that so much of the Christian faith is focused not on today, not on the short term, not on what's right in front of you. It's actually focused on eternity. On eternity, on tomorrow, on the future, on forever. On these concepts that just do not blend well with short-term thinking. So much of the Christian faith is focused not on today, but on eternity. And it creates this clash between we who naturally think short-term and then the faith that we're trying to live out and understand. Think about it, the promises of God, so many of them are fulfilled in forever, but not today. And so hang on, but hanging on is hard if you're just thinking short-term. So we place short-term expectations on an eternal faith, and we think, well, if I open my Bible and I start reading it, then things should really change in my life. But 4 days later, they haven't, and so this must not work. Well, fine, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to start going to church. And 2 weekends later, I haven't seen the change that I hoped to see in my life, and so that must not work because I only see it through the short term. There are so many things about the Christian faith that do not make sense with short-term thinking. Forgive other people when they've wronged you is not short-term thinking. Where's the short-term win in that? Take the money that you worked hard for and that you earned, give it away. Where's the short-term win in that? Short-term thinking says my marriage is hard, so what should I do? I want out. Short-term thinking says that person wronged me and I don't like it, so I should get back with them and I should fix it right now. There's no room in the short term for patience. There's very little room in the short term for hope that's not delivered right away to me. There's hardly any understanding in short-term thinking for this idea that like day over day, slowly, daily, we're going to grow, we're going to become more like Jesus. But short-term thinking, that just doesn't satisfy. That's hard to see. Short-term thinking forces us to make bad decisions. When we choose our words based on short-term thinking, when we choose what we're going to do with our money, with our time, with our relationships, all of these things. And God actually says that I'm giving you a faith. I'm inviting you into a life that is not about this right in front of you. It's about so much more. But if we don't see it, what ends up happening is we benefit from so little of it. The Christian faith doesn't look as helpful. It doesn't look as hope-filled. It doesn't seem as motivating. It doesn't seem like something that would give energy and focus and purpose to our lives when we only view it through the short term. And yet, what we're going to think about when we go through this today about what Jesus is for, what we're going to find is Jesus is for something that is not short term, but it's long term. It's not today, but it's forever. It's the essence of big picture. It's the essence of eternity. It's the essence of the future. And Jesus was for it in a way that it gave him energy and motivation and passion and purpose. And in a way that is intended to do the same for us if we can understand and elevate what Jesus is for. So we're going to look at something that captured the heart of Jesus in an incredible way. And let's just see if it can capture our hearts and if we can be for what Jesus is for. Let's go ahead and grab our Bibles, and we're going to go right now to some passages, 3 different passages, all written by the same author, John, a disciple of Jesus who considered himself to be Jesus' closest friend of all the disciples. And John has recorded in his book, John, one of the 4 Gospels, and then also a book, Revelation, that gives a picture of the future. And we're going to look at some snapshots of Jesus as he is interacting with his people and look at what Jesus is for. So we're going to go here to John, and we're going to start in John chapter 14. And what has happened here right now is Jesus is around what the disciples don't yet know is something that we call the Last Supper. In the final events of Jesus' life, one of the last things that happens is he gathers in a room with his 12 closest followers, and he shares an intimate, special meal with them, and he tells them some really significant, beautiful things, but he also tells them some really hard things. He's just told them, I'm going to leave you. One of you is a traitor, and you're all going to betray me. That's hard. That is troubling and difficult news. And yet right on the heels of that, then Jesus starts this paragraph and he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Look, I know you're in the middle of a really troubling time and things are going to go from bad to worse and they're going to be hard, but don't let your hearts be troubled. That it's possible to be in the midst of a very troubling time but have trouble-free hearts. And then he's going to unfold the recipe for how that is. Don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And so the way to do that, to have a trouble-free heart, is what we set our minds on, where we set our belief, what we think about and occupy our minds with. And we're going to see it's not something in the immediate. It's not something in the short term. It's not something in the here and now. In fact, he talks not about the room that they're in together. He talks about a very different house with very different rooms. He says, my Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? So I'm not thinking about this space or this moment. I'm thinking about another space and another moment. And when we think about that, it's the recipe for having a trouble-free heart. And he says, I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you. Now listen, this idea of like, I'm going to prepare a place for you. This is so much deeper and richer than the idea of like, I'm going to pull out the hide-a-bed, lay out some linens, set out some towels. This is so much richer and deeper than even, the baby's coming, so we're setting up the nursery and painting the walls. What Jesus is saying when he's saying, I'm going to prepare a place for you, is he's saying, I'm going from this room down to the garden where they're going to arrest me. And then they're going to take me and they're going to torture me. And then they're going to take me in front of a court and they're going to falsely accuse me and they're going to try me and they're going to find me guilty. And then they're going to take me from there. They're going to torture me some more. They're going to put me on a cross. And they're going to kill me. And then I'm going to rise again from the dead. and I am going to go up to the right hand of my Father in heaven. And after all of that, that's what I mean when I say, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And he says, after all of that, here's what's going to happen in the future. I will come back and take you to be with me. Jesus is saying, here's how to have a trouble-free heart in the midst of really troubling times. Don't look just at what's in front of you. Look at this idea that's way in the future. And he says, when I come back to take you to be with me, here's what he wants. And here's the hope he offers us, that you also may be where I am. We're going to look at this in through a few more lenses in just a moment. But I want you to understand, when we ask the question, what is Jesus is for, in a very beautiful, very powerful way, this is what Jesus is for. That he's looking at his closest friends right there and he's saying, I want you to be with me. And I'm going to do all of this and sacrifice all of this and go through all of this to make it happen. I'm going to prepare the place. I'm going to bring you back so that you will be with me where I am. That his heart beats to be together with his people. Now we're going to go, same author, another passage, just a couple chapters later. Again, John is writing, Jesus has moved, the story has moved forward. Now Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he is praying to his Father. And these are kind of some of the last prayers, last words. He's expressing what he wants before this whole thing goes down and my whole story here on earth is done. God, Father, Dad, here's what I want. And Jesus says in this prayer, intense prayer to his Father, he says this, Father, I want. Now, time out. If we're in a series called For, where we're asking what Jesus is for, I would recommend we pay very special attention to how a sentence like this would end. Because he's going to tell us exactly what he's for. Father, I want that those you have given me, so whatever he's about to say, because in a minute he's going to say, not my will, but yours be done. God, not what I want, but what you want, that's what wins. But in the meantime, before that, he's going, but here is what I want. And it has to do with us. Those you have given me, those who would come after, not just the Jews, but the Gentiles, not just the disciples in that moment, but all who would believe in the future, you. Father, I want that those you have given me. Now, what would you think he is about to say? That they would get their act together. That they would stop being the way that they're being. That they would do a better job of winning the world. That they would, and yes, Jesus wants a whole bunch of that stuff. But in this moment, when it's time to talk about what he wants most in his prayer to his Father, he says, Father, I want that those you have given me to be with me where I am. There it is again. That's what Jesus is for. That's what he wants. That's what he longs for. It's what he's praying for to his dad. I want those you have given me to be with me where I am. He wants you with him. Now, I know I say that, and you're like, yeah, that's so great because God loves us and he wants us with him. Do you realize how crazy that is? Look around this room for just 1 second and ask yourself, if you were forced to be on vacation for like 3 weeks with the people sitting right next to you, like how great or awful would that even be? Like some of us, we went to the altar, made these choices about forever, and we're like, okay, it was all right, you know. I'm just saying, like, I look around this room, I'm not sure I would look at every one of you and go, I want you to be with me forever together. And you probably wouldn't say the same thing about me. I don't know that you even want to be with you forever. I don't think we realize sometimes as Christians how crazy it is that God would want to be with you. Jesus wants to be with you. Jesus wants to be with you. So much so that he talked about it to his closest people at his Last Supper. So much so that he prayed about it to his Father in the garden. And he said, I want those you have given me to be with me. That's the heart of Jesus towards you. Do you realize how much he loves you? I want those you have given me to be with me where I am. And then he says this, and to see my glory. The glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. I want them to be with me, but I want them to be with me in this perfected state. We look at this to see my glory and we're like, yeah, Jesus wants us to come hang out at his crib and look at his trophy case. Like, of course he does. That's not the kind of glory that he's talking about. Imagine if he really, really is everything that the Bible says he is, that before the creation of the world, he was there, that he's the one who created it, that he is the light in heaven, that he is actually the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the most awesome. Would not you want to be there and see that? And he's saying, God, I want them to have the best thing possible, and the best thing possible would be to be able to see my glory, to be able to see the world as we created it to be able to live life the way we wanted them to live in the first place. I want that for them because you loved me, God, before the creation of the world. Jesus is hinting at this idea of eternity here. What he's saying is, Father, you and I were together in this love relationship that started in eternity past. And I have brought them into this love relationship with us that will continue into eternity future. I want them to see my glory and to be with us forever, the way that it was always meant to be. He prayed for this. He talked about it. It shaped the plans of his life. He died for this, and he's showing us what he really longs for. This is what Jesus is for. We continue, and what we see next in the book of Revelation, again, same author, John. And John is being given a vision of the future. So what happened now is Jesus went to the cross. Jesus rose again. His disciples went around the whole world telling everybody about Jesus. Churches sprung up. Persecution also sprung up. And all of those disciples, except for John, have been killed for their faith. John got exiled to the island of Patmos, and he's been by himself decades and decades later, and the Holy Spirit of God gives him a vision of the future. Now, the book of Revelation, boy, there's a lot to it, and some of it, you read it and you're like, I don't understand what I'm looking at. And some of it is actually a lot more clear. But what we know is the things that are written in the book of Revelation are things that are going to happen. And so I'm going to read to you something that is very clear that, listen, is going to happen. Like God gave him a vision of the future that will happen. And this is what it is. It's the exact same thing Jesus talked about. It's the exact same thing Jesus prayed for. And it's this. I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. God's desire is to be together with us. Man's purpose is to be a people who are unto God. And our destiny, if you are a Jesus follower, is that this is your future. That it's going to happen, that we are going to be together with him. And then John describes some of how awesome being together with him is going to be. And he says this, he'll wipe every tear from their eyes. And there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, because those are all part of the old order of things. And that old order of things will have passed away. You will have been to your last funeral. You're not ever going to another one. There will never be a time when somebody can take away something that you loved and it would hurt you. There will never be a thing in your future at that point that would have the ability to make you cry. At that point, there would never be a thing in your past that could still come back and hurt you. And I know today you go, man, I can't even imagine a scenario in which that baggage from my past, or that regret from my past, or that pain that I suffered in my past wouldn't still hurt. But your destiny is, it's going to happen. He will wipe every tear from your eyes. It's going to be gone. Because all of that is part of the old order of things. And he who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. To be together with him in eternity, but not in a world like you've ever experienced before. Because you've only known a body that breaks down and hurts, gets old and gets wrinkled. You've only known a world where people are mean to each other. Yes, there's relationships, but there's also lust, and there's also hatred, and there's also greed. You've never known those things perfected the way they were supposed to be. You've never known a relationship with God face to face. It's only been distant. And what Jesus is saying is, God, I'm going to create everything again. I'm going to restore it to its original, intended perfection, the way we made it at the beginning. I'm making everything new. Eternity with his people the way it was intended to be. Eternity with his people the way it was intended to be. Eternity with you the way it was intended to be. We're going to say it like this: forever, together, perfectly. Forever, together, perfectly. Say that with me. Forever, together, perfectly. One more time. Forever, together, perfectly. That's what Jesus is for. Forever, eternity, with no end, together. I want them to be with me. I want those you have given me to be with me where I am. I'm coming back to get you so we can be together, but not in a life like you've ever experienced before, because I'm going to make everything new. I'm going to make everything right. I'm going to make it perfect. Forever, together, perfectly. He didn't just talk about it. He prayed for it, but he didn't just pray for it. He died for it, and he made it happen, and he wrote about it in Revelation to tell you that really is your future if you're a Christian. Forever, together, perfectly. And what Jesus is for, Christians should be for. But we paint this whole picture of this thing, and we read this, and we hear this vision of the future that should inspire and motivate, and it's awesome. And somehow for some of us with short-term thinking, like we're still thinking about the marshmallow. Forever together perfectly is the promise that Jesus gives us. And when we finally look away from the plate and look up and we see all that is offered to us, we go, man, it is so much better to look into the long term, to look into the future, to look at what Jesus is for and before that, because that would motivate me. That would inspire me. That would give me purpose. That would give me energy in the way I live my life. So how do we, like Jesus, before this idea of forever together perfectly? Well, there are three ways that we can do that. What does it mean to be for heaven? And how do we move to that? The first one is this: foster your longing for forever together perfectly. Foster your longing for forever together perfectly. Jesus thought about it. He prayed for it. It occupied his mind and his thoughts and his passions. He wanted it so badly that it just spilled out of him in conversations that he was at. I think if we sat with Jesus, we would realize as he's looking at his people again, he created the world to be perfect. Sin screwed it up. We've never known anything beyond that. And what he wants for us is so much more. We see passages where Jesus looks out at his people and he goes, man, he wept for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Like his heart to make things right is a heart that ached for forever together perfectly. That's a word I want you to think about. You can even write it down under this point. Ache. There are things in our lives that just make us like long for something so much that we ache for it. I remember when Marcy and I were kind of moving toward getting married, and it was those final weeks until we were going to finally be together, live in the same house, not have to say goodbye at night. And I'd be dropping her off at her dorm and we'd kiss goodnight and she'd walk away and I just ached. I was so tired of being separate. If you've had a loved one that you've lost, you know what it's like to ache, to be together with them. When we look at the world, we look around and we see injustice and things that are just wrong. There's something in us that just aches. That is how we're supposed to feel about your future home in heaven. That you would ache for it, that you would long for it, that you would think about it so much that you would carry that pain with you. It's not an ache that you fix today. We got to wait. But it's not an ache that you forget today just because it hurts. It's supposed to hurt. Christians should be marked by a pain that says, I was created for another place and this isn't that place. This is not my home. We should carry that ache with us. I think sometimes we think, well, I don't want to think about heaven all the time because those people, they're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. I would go, that is far from your problem. Your problem is you're so earthly minded, you've forgotten where your real home is. You were not made for this world. This is not forever together perfectly. You were made for so much more than this, and Jesus wants that for you, and you're supposed to ache for it. Jesus, what do you want from me? I want you to want it. I want you to want it like I want it for you. Think about it. Read about it in the Bible. Talk about it with Christians. Talk about it with your kids because they got a way better imagination than you do. Have those conversations. Make a Spotify playlist about it. Listen to those songs and let it foster that ache. Engage in times of worship when we're together as a church. Because I know this ain't forever together perfectly, but this is about as good as it gets until then. It's not forever, but we're here for 70 minutes. It's together, sort of. It's certainly not perfectly, but when God's people are all around glorifying God and singing Him together, man, those are some of the closest moments we get to that. And it should create an ache in our hearts that we carry with us forever together perfectly. Paul said, we groan and are burdened because we long to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling. Do you feel that burden? I think for most of us, so often we just feel like short-term thinking, I'm settling for this. I'm going to treat this like it's my home. Don't settle. You were made for more. Jesus is for forever together perfectly. It spilled out of him. Every time he talked, he ached for it. And when we ache for forever together perfectly, it puts a longing inside of us that drives us. And when that longing drives us, the next point is what that drive creates in us. We don't just foster our longing, we fuel our endurance for anything we have to experience because of the promise of forever together perfectly. Fuel your endurance because forever together perfectly is your future, and it's coming, and it's so much better than what you have to endure today that it makes it worth it. When you can set your eyes and your sights on forever together perfectly, you're able to go through whatever is right here in the here and now. But if you lose sight of that and you just look at this, all of a sudden these things look so much bigger, so much harder, so much more difficult to overcome. I went on a run with my 10-year-old son a while back, and he wanted to go on a jog with me around the neighborhood. Now, I had done that route a few times, so I know just down that hill, take a left, go around the loop, and then you're home. So I kind of was able to have, like, in my mind, the finish line, even though I couldn't see it. But he didn't see the finish line, and he had no thought of the finish line. The only thing he was able to think about, what was right in front of him, and what was right in front of him was effort. It was difficulty. It was having to endure going through this run that he wasn't in shape for, and it was a struggle for him. And so all he thought about, all he reacted to, the only thing he processed was how hard it is. It was horrible. Dad, I have to stop and tie my shoe. Dad, I have to get a drink. These shorts are uncomfortable. I'm so tired. It was the worst until we finally cleared one corner and he could see just down this road, that's where it ends. And all of a sudden, he's fine. He's energized. He's light. It's like running with a little gazelle. The problem was not that he was tired. The problem was he was not fueled because he didn't have the right thing in his sights. If you lose sight of forever together perfectly and all you think about is the test that's coming up, the assignment that's due, the business meeting you got to prepare for, what's going on with your kids, how hard your marriage is right now, that tough conversation, the anxiety you're facing, the sickness you're dealing with, if that's all you see, man, you bet you're going to have a hard time enduring all of that. But when you can see just down the road, those things get fixed. Those things get healed. Those things are gone. Yes, your struggle with sin is real and it's hard today. But when you set your sights on forever together perfectly, you can endure your struggle with sin and keep up that fight because some of that sin is gone. You can endure the loneliness you're facing today because just down the road, that loneliness is gone. You can endure the sickness you're facing today because just down the road, that sickness is gone. Jesus set his sights on forever together perfectly, and for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. You can endure anything when you set your sights on forever together perfectly. And what you might say is, Jeremiah, you're talking about enduring over and over here. Like life isn't that hard for me right now. I just got some new golf clubs. Marriage is going pretty good. I got a vacation coming up in a couple weeks. Listen, let me just give hope that works for all of us. Your best days are nothing compared to what's down the road. And your worst days are worth it compared to what's down the road. Short-term thinking gets overwhelmed by what's right in front of us. But people who set their sights on forever together perfectly are courageous, they're joyful, they're willing to take risks, they trust, they're energized, they keep on going. Why? Because that fuels our endurance. It did for Jesus because he was for it. We need to be for forever together perfectly. Another thing that we can do, another thing that helps us be for forever together perfectly is that we filter our decisions through the grid of forever together perfectly. Filter your decisions. Heaven and the future that Jesus was securing was a filter for everything Jesus did. Remember where he was. In that room, surrounded by people that he was training to accomplish this mission, to get the gospel to the world. He was in the garden praying to his Father on the way to the cross. His whole life, his yeses and nos were shaped through the filter of forever together perfectly and making that a reality for us. And so he had this strong filter to say, I will do this and I won't do this because of what is coming. When we set our sights on forever together perfectly, it gives us a filter for our decisions. I was with my high school junior daughter at a school event, and she's going to start next year going to this technical school where she can start getting a leg up on some of the studies that she's going to want for her healthcare career. And so we were there, and they have a bunch of different people at this technical school in different fields, and in line in front of us was a welding student, and this teacher was talking to this kid who was going into their welding program, and she was saying, I know you're going into your junior year now, but 2 years from now, there are companies that are going to want to hire you for $40,000, $50,000 a year. Then she started getting kind of animated and kind of excited. And she was like, so when your friends come to you and they say, come do donuts in the parking lot with us, come vape in the bathroom with us, you need to tell them, I got plans. And I was like, I am going to preach that. That is so good. And what she was saying, in essence, to this guy is she was saying, you're going to have choices in the short term that you have to make. You're going to have to decide yes, or you're going to have to decide no. And when you do, make the choices based on the filter of your future opportunity. And does it make sense in line with that? If it makes sense in line with your future opportunity, do that thing. If it doesn't make sense in line with your future opportunity, do not do that thing. That's what she was saying. And I'm just saying to us, forever together perfectly is a grid that drove Jesus' decisions, and it should drive ours as well. When your money choice that you're about to do makes sense in light of the fact that someday you will be forever together perfectly with Jesus, do that thing. If it doesn't, don't do that thing. If that relationship choice, if that time investment choice makes sense in light of forever together perfectly, do it. And if it doesn't, don't. That is our filter. That drove Jesus's decisions. How would that change the way we do our hobbies? How would that change the way we parent our kids? How would that change the reasons why we said yes or no to discipling somebody or serving in a certain ministry or rearranging our schedule so we could be in a group? How would that change the kinds of things that we say yes and no to on a daily basis? What's a choice that you've made recently? A thing you've said yes to, given time, money, effort to, that if Jesus came back right now, you'd just be flat out embarrassed. Because it just doesn't make any sense in light of forever together perfectly. Maybe another question would be, what would be the first thing you'd change if you were to say, I'm going to make choices in line with forever together perfectly? Jesus was for heaven, and he shaped his whole life around it. And when we are for forever together perfectly, it helps us make better decisions. It helps us have a plan and a direction for our lives. This idea of forever together perfectly, listen, this isn't just it's not a theory. It's not just an idea. It's not just cheesy song lyrics, it's I'll fly away. It's not just some metaphor for things that are going to get better someday or a better place. It is a truth that we see in Revelation is the destiny of Christians, and that we see in Jesus' heart. He wanted it so badly. He was so fiercely for this. Can we get our sights off the marshmallow in front of us and look up and see that what God offers us and what Jesus invites you to is so much more than what you think about on a daily basis? It is so much more than what occupies your time. And when we are for heaven like Jesus is for heaven, man, that will energize and inspire and change so much. This was a good message for me. It was good for me to spend time thinking about this, because I, like you, probably don't spend a ton of time thinking about heaven. Unless I'm reading about it in a passage in the Bible, or unless somebody close to me dies, or unless I watch something on the news that turns my stomach. Those are usually kind of the triggers for the times that I think about heaven. And what's true is there's going to be a lot of relief for the thing that, like that loved one who passed away, you'll get to see him again. And that will be great in heaven. That the war that you wish wasn't happening, guess what? There's going to be a time when there's no more wars, and that will be great. There's going to be streets of gold, and that's going to be awesome. There's going to be music and singing, and there's going to be glorified bodies, like everything will just feel great, and that's going to be awesome. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be true of heaven that is not the primary reason why we're supposed to look forward to heaven. Actually, the real reason why we're supposed to look forward to heaven is that Jesus is going to be there. I want to say very, very clearly to all of us, the prize of heaven is not any of those other things. It's not your grandma. It's not the streets of gold. It's not the fact that there won't be any more sin. It's Jesus. The prize of heaven is you will get to be with him and see him in perfect relationship forever, together, perfectly. And I want to press this because here's what I know. I think sometimes we think about heaven without thinking about Jesus. There's this kind of country music sentimentality about heaven of like, man, they'll have all my favorite beer and I'll get to, play 18 holes of golf with my uncle who taught me how to fish, and I'll get to see my dog again. There's no Jesus in that picture. When you think about heaven, where is Jesus in the picture? Is he at the bullseye of it all? Because here's what I want to say, and I say this in love, but if you can picture heaven without Jesus, I'm not sure you're actually going there. Forever together perfectly means Jesus is crazy about you. And I think that the litmus test for going, is that your destiny, is the answer to the question, are you crazy about him? Because we hear this, but I just want us to understand you'll only be as excited about heaven as you are excited about Jesus. So we get to the end of this message, and if you go, my heart is soaring, it's beating out of my chest, I can't wait to be there, awesome. Some of us get to the end of this message and we go, well, why isn't my heart soaring? Like why is the connection not being made? Some of us are somewhere in between. What I'd like for all of us to do is just to really assess personally and just ask ourselves this question. What is the level of your affection for Jesus? What is the level of your affection for Jesus? He loves you so much. He wants to be with you forever, together, perfectly. Do you love him? And what does that answer say? And what are you going to do to stoke that fire, to increase the level of your affection for Jesus? Because you'll only be as excited about heaven as you are about Jesus, and you increase that love for Jesus forever, together, perfectly becomes more real, more motivating, more powerful in your life. I think we've all had kind of versions of a day that we really look forward to. A day that we imagine in the future and we think about it, it captivates our attention. Maybe it's that vacation that you've set out. For some of us, it's retirement. You put on your phone the countdown clock to retirement. You start at like 2 years early, 600 days, But we look forward to that. We dream about that day. A bride and a groom, they're dreaming about their wedding day. She's dreaming about the wedding day. He's dreaming. But we think about that day. We think about the day when the nest empties or when I won't have school anymore. Right now, a bunch of us are thinking about how great it'll be when those assignments aren't in front of me every week anymore. We think about that day when that dream finally comes true. We dream about that day. I want us to do something right now. Just close your eyes and let's imagine a day. A day that John in Revelation says this is really going to happen. This is your destiny. The day when you see walking up to you the Jesus who created you. The Jesus who called you to be in relationship with him. The Jesus who died for you, who invited you to a life with him, who saved you, like paid his own blood and death for everything that you did wrong. The Jesus who sealed you with his Holy Spirit to make sure that no one could snatch you out of his hand. He was going to get you all the way there. He protected you through your life in ways you don't even now know. He was an incredible companion to you. Those times when you cried out to him and he came through for you and he was there with you, and he's there with you now. The Jesus who kept every one of his promises and gave you wisdom and gave you comfort. And he looks at you and he says, welcome to forever together perfectly with me. That day should drive us. We should ache for that day. We should shape our lives around that day. And that day can help us endure anything we have to face today. Even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Amen.